for, since most people don't have the jargon that we have. So that's one example, but also being good facilitators of that information and asking the right questions and sending the best information to our officers. That's what we have been busy doing. Another part of the agreement that you might not be aware of that's been in place prior to the DOJ is that we transfer calls, people who are suicidal, but they really are at a place where they want to talk to somebody. They don't have plans, they don't have the means, but they need help. In the past, the city of Portland would send a police officer or police officers to those people. That only escalated the situation. Mm-hmm. If that person called a crisis line, they wouldn't get a police officer. But we were obligated, we only had 3 choices. We send you fire, we send you police, or we send you an ambulance. So the city, prior to the agreement, developed a partnership with Multnomah County Crisis Line so that we have that fourth option, if you will, where we can send someone who is in crisis, but a low-level crisis. We're speaking to them, or we're speaking to somebody with them who can communicate with that person in crisis. We'll send them over to the crisis line with the county. That is outside of the agreement, but the agreement does mention our continued work to identify those calls and get people connected to services, not just a police response. So we benefited in our recent training with working with the crisis line, and they came over and did some training for us. We've also done some training for them. There are many situations that people call us with that by policy we need to send police out for. And that's the policy that our partner agencies direct us to do. So we are really, we are facilitating the policy that we're given. But we're trying to find the best ways to do that, the best ways to serve you in the community, and also make sure that community safety, officer safety, responder safety is considered. So that's what we have been busy doing for the last year or so.
Thank you, Melanie. Okay, sure. I've got 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
First
Feel
of all,
free to
I'm
jump in.
a
Okay.
cop watcher,
I'll get you. Thank you.
so I listen to the scanner all the time, and I hear continuously even calls where mental health people are sitting there saying, where you guys know someone's suicidal by cop, and you still send the police.
Yeah, that's policy. And we're communicating that to officers so they know what's happening, and they take a different approach. They have a different tactic. If someone says that they want to, they are interested in suicide by cop, we have to tell them that. But if someone's in crisis, we don't want to leave them sitting in crisis.
Send an ambulance. Don't send a cop.
So the ambulance doesn't have the same amount of training that our officers have. Our officers
Better
are
trained.
they are
Better.
very highly trained.
Yeah.
So and really we hear from many people who have worked with the ambulance. Their job is to do medical treatment. Their job is not to do that kind of crisis intervention. So it is a different experience if we send an ambulance. They have limited tools compared to what an officer can do right now, especially an enhanced crisis intervention officer.
Yeah, an officer has a gun. He can shoot people.
So, thank you. So actually, I'm going to go over here because she hasn't had a chance yet, and then I'll come back to you. Did one of you, the 3 of you, were pointing at each other? Okay.
I was just wondering, you were speaking to a low-level crisis and the dispatch for a low-level crisis being there's this different option, and I'm wondering why, how you understand the distinction between a low-level crisis and a high-level crisis, and why in a high-level crisis the presence of an armed officer would not also be extremely escalating and potentially lethal, where it also would be in a so-called low-level crisis where somebody, like you say, is maybe suicidal and doesn't have plans, versus a high-level crisis where I can only see the potential for somebody to be way more escalated and that to result in use of force.
So we worked with the county crisis line, and they often refer calls to us. They refer calls back to 911 to have a police response. So it is really, from a public safety perspective, that they define to us what would be an appropriate call for us to transfer to crisis line. So they've identified for us what they consider to be something that is less acute, and we do our best to connect people to those resources. But they are also calling us when they're talking to someone who's in crisis, who is elevated, and they're asking for police assistance. They also have the ability to dispatch project respond, and that's their responsibility, so we kind of work in tandem, but that was an agreement, like the level of call, the level of crisis, that was an agreement between the city and the county, and what the county felt comfortable with in dealing, being able to answer those questions and to help. That was not our decision, and I know that there's been a lot of work around figuring out who is going to be the best responder. And we are aware of that, so our job is to ask good questions so we give the best information that we can. But again, we just have just a little bit, and oftentimes, if you can think about calling 911, what people tell us might be just a portion of what they're experiencing. They'll answer a question, but when police arrive on scene, when anybody arrives on scene, they discover that it's more complex than what they told us. So we have, again, very limited information in trying to get the best resources to what we know. And we all work together to try to facilitate that.
Okay, I want to, what's your name? I'm sorry.
Donna.
Donna, thank you. Can Donna go, and then we have someone back there who has
Mine's
a
is
chance.
quick. Okay. In 2012, Brad Morgan was killed. He called 911. 911 kept him on the phone. He was going through crisis. 911 kept him on the phone, talking to him. Police showed up, and, that was the end of the line for him. But is it possible that you can send a crisis person and police? I mean, a crisis person can sit in the car and talk to a horn. Isn't it possible that they both can come when a person's in crisis, whether it's a high crisis or a low crisis?
My familiarity, please bear in mind, is as a trainer. And I know that the city of Portland has made some changes in how they're training the crisis negotiation team. So now we're working together in partnership. It used to be that when police officers would respond, we would turn the call over to them. And now we are conferencing calls, so we get to stay on the line to maintain that level of rapport for the crisis negotiation teams, and that has been a recent change. So the specifics, I know that as a result of Brad Morgan's death, but I really think our police officer representatives can answer more details about that. But
Okay.
And that's who we're hearing from next.
Yeah.
Thank
So-
you, Melanie.
Come on. What's his name?
Okay, I've got you in the gray sweater, and then I'll come back to you.
Over the course of the settlement agreement, the DOJ and the COCO have repeatedly said that the city's been unable to track the number of mental health calls officers are sent to. Why is that so difficult, and what's being done to address that?
Well, I believe that's
Is that
actually
outside
happening
of your
now.
scope?
Yeah, I think on the police side, they might be able to answer that question for you. For us, again, we have such a very small window.
Doesn't BOAC track the calls that officers, like ECIT officers are
Yeah,
sent
we
to?
know we can certainly tell you how many times ECIT officers went out on a call, but that doesn't necessarily mean how many calls we talked to with someone who's experiencing mental illness or mental health crisis.
And my follow-up question is, are there times when ECIT officers aren't available?
I can speak to that because I've seen recent statistics. I think I don't want to steal their thunder, but very rarely. Actually, the city has done an excellent job at recruiting and having staff, having well-trained volunteers around the city so that the ECIT officers are available when we dispatch them. So
Do you know what the statistics are?
I'm not gonna, those aren't my statistics, so I'll let the people
Let's
who own
hold
that
police
statistics.
questions
Yeah.
directly, because Chief Outlaw's next on the agenda, so that's her world. She may be able to answer more.
You keep mentioning
Oh,
training.
I'm sorry.
Oh, in the back?
Yeah.
Hi, Nancy.
Who, I
See
know
my
your
friend
name, and
Nancy.
I'm sorry, I'm just like,
all right.
end of a very long day.
I don't get to plug and say, I love it when Maxine Bergenstein's Oregonian questions turn out to be unanswerable. But Charles Bridgegray Johnson, and recently the city, well, not so recently, but anyway, we should have fully implemented 911 text now.
Yes.
So, is there any databasing that, where now people can pre-register a number so that if they have communicative or mobility disabilities, dispatchers have a pre-existing awareness of that? Because people's interaction with the police is gonna be very different if they're blind or deaf. Obviously, texting 911's not really so much, well, there are audio aids for that, but also, you know, nationwide, there's been concerns about disparities in lethal police outcomes. And is there anything going on in that regard with, whether, I don't know if the cell agreement touches on that, but just general.
It doesn't, and there is a registry, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't have the information about how to access that, but there is a registry that you can volunteer and add information, and that will appear to us, and there's a name that will come to me. So people can share information, and when you give us your name or your address, that is in the records, and we can attach that so the officers know more about you. But it's not mandatory. We don't collect any of that data. We just attach what is
But
available.
concerned people can get in touch with
There-
COAB and get that registered.
So actually, the disability program for the city, has a registry they work on, and if you don't mind, Philip, I'm saying, Philip is on the commission for Commission of Disability, so
I
he
can
can
answer
clue
that
you in after the meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks, I saw, did I see someone else was back there? Yes, thank you.
So you keep mentioning trainings, and so I'm wondering a little bit about who designed the curriculum for the trainings, if there's a specific coach in mind. I'm thinking about if there's a trauma-informed lens. I work in mental health as well, and whether the trainings are going to be publicly accessible or just any of the materials published, so that members of the community can understand what is like directly and tangibly meant when you just throw around the word training.
So we developed this training with the Portland Police Bureau, with the crisis intervention folks of the Portland Police Bureau. We also worked with people from the state to develop this. And much of it, if you're familiar with the 40 hours of crisis intervention training that is delivered to police, we have borrowed and adapted that for 911. Since we don't see people, we're not building relationships, we don't have the opportunity to slow things down in the way that a police officer on scene can. We've adapted the information that we have available to us to really build our understanding, stigma reduction, understanding a little bit more about mental illness. So we're asking better questions. And you're the first person who's asked me about making that public, so I need to go find out more about that. No one ever asks trainers if they want us to share training. So I'll find out more.
Thank you. If you have like one more, yes, Philip?
Hello, I'm Phil Wolf. In 2012, I had an experience where I required the police. It was a domestic violence situation, and I was very scared of my partner that he was gonna kill me. So I did call the police. Now understand, I'm deaf, and the dispatcher hung up on me. I told them that I needed an ASL interpreter sent with the police. They said, no, that's not your decision. The police decide if you need an interpreter or not. So I was trying to let the dispatcher know, no, actually, I'm telling you, I'm deaf. I need an interpreter, and I was hung up on, and it was a big mess. The police arrived. There was no interpreter. An ASL interpreter was not present. So I want 911 to know and to be able to tell the police when a deaf person needs that type of accommodation. Is that something that you're including with your training, that the police will know that the person is deaf, and then there's a way to dispatch the ASL interpreter with the police at the same time?
So I don't think there's a way for us to currently dispatch an ASL interpreter, but we have the responsibility to communicate what we know. And I think we're paying much more attention to what the caller is saying as a result of doing more awareness training. So we don't, like I said, we don't have that as an option for us to dispatch. But, you know, That's what I know for right now, and communicating the caller's needs, the caller situation is the best tool that we have available.
Thank you, Melanie.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, thank you for everyone for your questions. Is this specifically about the piece with 911?
Yeah.
Okay, that will take one more
So the
quick question.
training, is it modeled on other cities that are more successful than this city and not on the oversight of a federal judge to get it corrected?
So
That
there
you
is,
model after, I hope?
we have, please know that there's not very many 911 dispatch models to use. So the crisis
You didn't answer
intervention,
my question.
um, so we have, there are core elements that we followed. The core elements that were designed by, and promoted by the Memphis model. There are core elements for crisis intervention